The purpose of today's webinar is to introduce you as court staff to ways in which you can engage the tribal community and tribal leadership in supporting the tribal court. Today's presenters will be Kevin Illingworth, who is a professor of tribal management with UAF, Estelle Thompson, who is the tribal court program director for the native village of Piemute, and Darlene Daniel, the chief clerk of court at the native village of Kongaganak. Before we get into the meat and potatoes for today's session, could I confirm if Seth O'Brien, are you on the line? Seth, if you're on the line, you may need to unmute yourself. Okay, we're gonna move on. Sorry, Seth is not on the line. I know he's been having some technical difficulties. I would like to welcome Vivian Corthius, the AVCP CEO, to provide today's welcome address. Vivian?
Hi, Denise. This is a test. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, great. I am having some computer problems with the internet. So if I freeze or the computer freezes, just keep on going. So I just wanted to welcome everyone to the training sessions. I jotted down some points that I wanted to share with you. They're not very many, but I think they're important. So again, thank you and welcome to the AVCP Tribal Justice Court Training Series for this year. I have a couple things that I wanted to share with you. When I was preparing for this, I started thinking about the idea of hope, and that is what my hopes are for the training session. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about those things. And I actually wrote these down, so I'm just going to go over them just briefly. So my hope in this training session and these series of trainings that AVCP is sponsoring with partners is that the training series will crystallize tribal courts. And you can put another verb in there. I'm hoping that this training series acts as a catalyst for tribal courts. And the idea is to use these trainings as a change mechanism. And it operates with synergy. In other words, good energy making more good energy. So that is really what I'm hoping, is that the series that is being kicked off today starts that catalyst, or that is that change mechanism, or in other words, something that'll crystallize tribal courts in our region. I wanted to say that I consider all of you in the driver's seat, not just asking for input, but asking for change. Choosing the direction to go in and actually going in that direction. So consider all of yourselves in the driver's seat, not a passenger, but in the driver's seat for tribal courts. The series are going to walk you through the process of protocols, different laws, different ways of managing, different policies, practices, software, all the things that are needed to put this puzzle together that has so many pieces. So my encouragement to you all is to safeguard That knowledge safeguard your communities and safeguard the benefits of the process that you're entering. Use adaptation, use innovation, and most of all, protect the communities that you're working for. That's my hope out of the whole process of tribal court training for AVCP. So Denise, that's all I prepared for today. I want to congratulate you and your staff for putting this series together and making AVCP's role a small part of something much bigger that's happening in our region. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. So I just want to say I always enjoy listening to Vivian speak. She always has really encouraging words, and I just wanted to thank you again. Next, I would like to welcome Kevin Illingworth. Many of you have likely heard from or spoken with Kevin. He is, like I said, the professor of tribal management at UAF, and he is going to lead our presentation regarding tribal court development and growing a tribal justice system. I'm going to hand the mic over to you, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Denise, and thank you for welcoming all of us, Vivian. So the title of this presentation is Tribal Court Development, Growing a Tribal Justice System. This afternoon, we're really going to be focusing on leadership and working with leadership. I do want to say that I'm going to be introducing a lot of these topics. I'm going to be talking about ideas for helping your community grow your own tribal justice system. But we're really then going to be hearing from the experts, and I'm excited to hear from Darlene and Estelle because they've actually done this in their communities and are really going to share some strategies for helping grow your justice system. I really appreciated the welcome for a number of reasons, but because the idea of synergy, good energy making more good energy, I think is so important. The idea that we're not trying to do this alone, but instead that we're here helping each other, that we're all helping each other find our way through this. So Denise, would you go to the first slide? I am going to be going through some of these first slides rather quickly because this is the background information that your leadership needs to know. I say it that way because when we're talking leadership, we're talking about our elected council members. And often we see turnover in our tribal councils. And so education is an ongoing process. We're never finished educating ourselves, and we're never finished educating our people, our community. I included these slides in here because this is that background information that all of our tribal council members should know. What is tribal sovereignty? What is inherent sovereignty? This idea that tribal governments have a sovereignty that comes not from other governments, not from the United States, but rather from the people themselves. That federal law recognizes that tribal sovereignty comes from your tribal citizens, your tribal members. Next slide, please. And it's not just the federal courts or the federal government that recognizes this. This is recognized by the Alaska Supreme Court. This quote here is from the Alaska Supreme Court in a case that was called John versus Baker, using incredibly powerful language to describe tribal governments in Alaska. They said, do Alaska Native villages have inherent non-territorial sovereignty, allowing them to resolve domestic disputes between their own members? And the Alaska Supreme Court said, we hold that Alaska Native tribes, by virtue of their inherent powers as sovereign nations, do possess that authority. that the Alaska Supreme Court says that your community, your tribe, is a sovereign nation that does have sovereignty to develop your own tribal justice system. Next slide. Now, when we're talking about how your tribal government is organized, it's your tribal constitution that provides for your overall structure of government, and usually has some language authorizing the tribal council to make a tribal justice system. It may just be language like this that just says provide for maintenance of law and order. It could say specifically that you could establish courts. It probably just says that you have the authority, the tribal council has the authority to protect the health and welfare of the tribe. So next slide. But it's really up to the tribal council to write our tribal written laws, the tribal ordinances or codes. So this is sample language establishing a tribal court. Now, I want to say, before we go any further, that this idea of tribal court development, and my saying tribal court, I apologize, I should be saying tribal justice system. We say court, and I think that comes with a lot of baggage. It means we think of things like law and order, or attorneys and a judge wearing a black outfit. Your tribal justice system should really reflect and be what you want it to be. So part of this presentation is going to be figuring out, what do you want your tribal justice system to be? Maybe you just want to start off helping out kids. Maybe having a child protection court, an ICWA court. And those are the type of cases that you hear. So you could start small and work big, but the purpose of this presentation is try to help find what is that vision for a tribal court within your community. So next slide. So this slide really is to just show that the inherent authority belongs to the tribal members. Your tribal members vote on your constitution, the tribal and on tribal council members, the tribal council members vote to pass the ordinances. But really, if good leadership is supposed to reflect your tribal members. And so this presentation really doesn't try to make you lean on tribal leadership or change the tribal council, but rather to build the support for the tribal court development, tribal justice development from the bottom up, from your tribal members, supporting the tribal justice system. So next slide. Some of you have probably heard me say this a lot, but I truly believe, since the authority to make and enforce tribal laws comes from the tribal members, it's essential for the tribal council to work in open meetings and allow tribal members to participate. I know it's, of course, really hard when we're talking about pandemic times, but the more transparent we can make our government, the more open we can make our government, the more tribal members are likely to want to follow the law. And this is so important. We have an opportunity to do something right. I don't know about you guys, but it seems like throughout history, the federal government or the state of Alaska makes these laws and we don't get to have a say in what those laws are. And we find out about the laws after the fact. That's not really the way governments are supposed to be run. This really should be coming from your tribal members. And I really do feel that all of us as citizens, all of us are much more likely to follow the law when we've had a chance to say what the law is. Parents are much more likely to agree with the tribal court in helping them take care of their children if they were asked some time ago if they thought that the tribal council should be held, or that the tribal court, the tribal council should be helping parents. So the idea of really trying to get our tribal members involved in our tribal governance is going to be a big theme for this presentation. Go ahead, Denise. So this really is where I think the important part of this talk becomes is if we want our tribal members to follow the law, then our tribal members need to know what the law is. I teach a lot about history, and we have this history in Alaska of laws being passed in Juneau or laws being passed in Washington, D.C., and then suddenly here in Alaska, we're told, oh, well, you're breaking the law. But we didn't even know what the law is. That's why it's so important for the tribal members to be involved in writing what the tribal law is. We shouldn't have outside lawyers or consultants, but really this should be coming from your tribal members themselves. What's important to them? Okay, next slide. So these next couple slides are just really ideas for building community support. How do we get our tribal citizens, how do we get our tribal members excited about tribal court? I say it that way because it's hard. People don't get excited about tribal court, about tribal justice, but this is tribal sovereignty. This is self-government. This is our opportunity to do things ourselves and do it the right way. So really encouraging tribal members to attend council meetings where we're talking about tribal ordinances or about tribal justice systems. And by encouraging them to come to the meetings, I really mean hold a special meeting just for them, have door prizes, dinner, food. And of course, this is after we get through this pandemic, but we're gonna so want to come together. Having an opportunity to talk about the future of our community when we have dinner, when we have door prizes, is a real incentive to come. Okay, thanks, Denise. But really making an effort to go out and meet our tribal members where they are. And this is one I know we have, some of our professionals have some experience with, is doing some written surveys or oral surveys. Now, when I say an oral survey, I really mean having somebody go out and knock on people's door, or maybe at this time, call them up on the phone and ask them about their support for tribal court. Do they want to form a tribal justice system to help parents take care of their children? Do we want to have an active ICWA department so that our kids aren't being taken away by OCS? What are some other issues in the community that we want the tribal justice system to be able to deal with, to make our lives better, to make sure that our children are safe, that our families are safe, that people are safe in our communities? And also posting drafts of these written laws. That's something that the state and the city actually require, but it's up to your tribe. I really think it's important, even if people don't read these drafts very much, they see them up and they know something's going on. My experience has been that whenever we surprise somebody, if people feel like we're springing something on them, we reject it. We really are hesitant. We're scared of change. So we want to know these things are happening. We want to be informed. And I think that this goes double for the youth. So the next slide, what about the youth? It's not just empty words to say that the youth are our future. We've all been around probably long enough to know that it seems like 1 minute we're talking about somebody like they're a youth, you know, they're 16, 17 years old, maybe 15 years old. And then all of a sudden the next year, it seems like they're 20 years old and they're a leader in our community. Involving the youth really means thinking about our future. If we want kids to be involved, we need to make them get involved. They may not act interested, but kids really do want to know what's going on and have a say in their lives, right? This is why kids rebel all the time. They want to have a say in what's going on. This really puts the ball in their hands. You really want to have a say in what's going on, you can help us develop our own justice system. And I say this because in my experience, it's been our youth, it's been our young adults that are really essential in building that synergy, in building that good energy to get the tribal court going. So getting into the school, Giving presentations at the school. Have teachers do this as a class project. I know it sounds a little bit weird to have your teachers teaching about tribal constitutions and tribal law, but I have to tell you, I have teachers around the state all the time asking me about, well, what can we do to get to look at tribal constitutions? When we're talking about the US Constitution too, how do we get a copy of our tribal constitution or the tribal constitution? Have workshops on tribal court and developing laws in your school. Do circle in your school. Make the kids a part of what's going on. I've worked with a couple different communities where the tribal court actually started in the school. We came to the school and we did a presentation on circles, and we talked about a way that this could be used if kids are fighting or if kids aren't doing their schoolwork or aren't showing up to school, we could do a circle. And that circle process is really healing. It doesn't put people down. It doesn't tell them they're wrong. It's uplifting. It helps the other kids support each other in making good decisions, in doing the right thing. These circles may have started at the school, but once the kids graduated from school, they went on and they did more. They started using circles in their tribal court. So next slide, please. Other ideas for trying to get your tribal members involved. Really just constantly asking your tribal members, putting this on their radar, so to speak, so that they know that tribal court is developing. In my opinion, you don't have to use a consultant. There are a lot of really good resources available. I then say there are a couple good consultants out there and some hints that if you do need to use a consultant. But if you go to the next slide, I talk about some other resources out there. If your tribe is just beginning tribal ordinance development or thinking about their tribal court, really the idea is start with one thing and build from there. If it's ICWA, start with child protection in ICWA cases. If we have loose dogs, we could start with animal cases. The idea of, and I think the place to start is looking at what other communities are doing, looking at what your neighbors are doing. So you hear this all the time, don't try to reinvent the wheel. We should all be working together. So next slide, please. My first resource that I always go to, I have to tell you, is other tribes. Right now, I know a couple of tribes around the state who are doing some pretty progressive things. There are a lot of them in your region. They're doing things with like tribal police officers and law enforcement, doing things in domestic violence, trying to make sure women and elders are being taken care of. So ask what your neighbor tribes are doing, both local, like in your subregion or in your immediate vicinity, but also regionally. Ask for a copy of their code. Share your code with other tribes. Please, if you have any written tribal laws, if your tribal court is hearing cases, talk about it, share it with other tribes, because everybody's struggling. We're all trying our best, and none of us are doing it perfect, but you know what? We're all doing really good. My second, I think the second most important resource is your kids, your youth, the school. Have them do internet research. What are other tribes doing? What can justice systems look like? As adults, some of us get entrenched in what we know and how we've done stuff. Ask our youth and they can find new ways of doing things. Peacemaking, justice circles, elder circles. How did justice look in the past? How did we keep peace in our community? These really are the answers to the future too. So other tribes and your youth, those are your two biggest resources right in your own community. And then next slide. Our final list of resources, then I have on here some links. AVCP, Tribal Justice, has been doing a lot of work in gathering sample tribal codes and processes that tribal courts are using. Same with Tanana Chiefs, and these links will take you directly to past presentations and a lot of materials. The Alaska Tribes website is listed there. They have a lot of great material, as well as the State of Alaska's Tribal Court Toolbox and the Native American Rights Fund. Also, another group that I don't have listed on here, but are doing some really great training, has been the Alaska Native Justice Center. And I'm happy to see Rick here at this training too. So with that said, I apologize for going through that quickly, but I really wanted to leave time for those that have really done this and are experts that you're going to hear from next. So Kana, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. That was a really great presentation. You always have really great presentations. Does anybody in the audience have any questions for Kevin before we pass the mic to Estelle? If you do have questions, please press *6 if you're on the phone, or the unmute button if you're on the Teams app or the webpage app. If you're online, you could also drop that into the chat if you'd like. So hearing none, Estelle, I'm going to pass the mic on to you for your boots on the ground experience.
Cleona, Kevin, for the wonderful presentation. I really enjoy looking through your slides and kind of refreshing my mind on all these things. My English name is Estelle Thompson. My Yupik calling name is Angutkara for my mother's family. I'm the eldest child of Forrest and Dorothy Thompson, and the second eldest granddaughter of George and Alice Napoleon of Napakamute, Tupperway, and Baimute, and the eldest granddaughter of Hillary and Maria Gayayok of Chafornik. My biological father was Charlie Abangutluk Gayayok, and I'm a consultant. I work really closely with the Native Village of Paimute, and I actually am the former tribal court program director for the Native Village of Paimute. I took on a consultancy role so I could spend a little bit more time doing additional work outside of tribal court that's related to taking care of our people. But my most important job is as a mother of 3 children. My eldest child is going to be 27 pretty soon. My daughter just turned 21, and my baby is 15. I'm originally from Hooper Bay, but I've grown up all over the place. My mom and dad were school teachers, so I've been really fortunate to live all over the place, all over Alaska, as well as where my dad's family is in Washington State. And one of the things that I saw in Kevin's presentation, and I know that sometimes it makes people intimidated, is thinking about all these things that we have to write down. And I've said this before at other presentations I've done with Denise and Kevin and Rick and Darlene, that we shouldn't be intimidated by thinking about all these different laws that we have, because as Yupik people, traditionally, we're able to govern our villages with our own laws and our own ideas of what is just in our communities, long before Western courts came into our lives. We've been here for thousands of years, and we've been able to manage our communities and take care of one another and do what's right for thousands of years. So I don't think anybody should be intimidated or nervous about writing all these different things. There's lots and lots and lots of different judicial codes that you can look at, and they may seem like they're kind of a lot at first, a lot to go through, but really they're pretty basic. There's some places that have really long and big judicial codes. I remember the first time I looked through the Alaska statutes. It's like a box set on your desk, except it goes all the way across your desk. They're pretty big and very intimidating. But really, the tribal laws that we have really go along with what we believe in our culture. And as one of my elders, Paul John Tuksuk, said, I think he was the brother of my nanny Gayagayok. He always said that our lives are a moral act between responsibility and respect. And so what that means for me working in justice is we look at what we know to be right and what we have responsibilities for, and we kind of put that down on paper. What that's done for me in my work with tribal courts is when we were looking at our judicial codes, we were like, okay, what's the most important things for us? You know, we wanted to make sure that our families were taken care of, our elders were taken care of. We wanted to make sure that we treated each other with the kind of respect that we each deserved. And, you know, we made them, just like Kevin said, as simple as possible. For us to be able to look at those codes, I looked at codes from all over the United States with different tribes. And you don't have to do that. There's some really good sample codes from like Canada Chiefs Conference. And I'm sure Denise has some copies that are very simple, easy to read, laid out. As Yupik people, we didn't have all of these things written down. We learned them. We lived them every single day. So if you think about it that way, it's not scary to think about, okay, how am I going to do this? I look at our tribal codes as kind of like a story that we tell about what we want our people to look like, what we want our communities to look like. And it can be really hard work because, like I said, we're not a writing down kind of people, you know. Everything we had was oral, passed down. But it's important to be able to have those things down. And it's also very important for you to have a good, clear communication with your traditional council or your tribal council on what they want in those laws. It took a couple of years for my traditional council to go through the judicial codes, even though it wasn't real big, but it was important that they understood what our justice system was doing. They wanted to make sure that they fell in line with our values as Yupik people, but also kind of followed along with what the state saw as being important. As far as like laws, we wanted to make sure our laws were kind of, they matched up with some of the things for the state, especially related to domestic violence or things for our kids. One of the things that I thought was really great with Kevin's presentation was that he was able to pull in examples of things like with the schools. And what I've seen in my research and also the work that I'm doing is that more and more people are starting to realize that if you put the importance on prevention, working with kids, you'll have a better functioning community. So I really firmly believe what Kevin said about working with the kids is super important. One of the organizations in my community of Hooper Bay, what they have is an organization called Kolazvik, and you can find that on the internet. There's it means toolbox, basically, I think. But you can look up some of the information about the program. They talk about teaching traditional values and skills. The program in my village in Hooper Bay does a lot of service-oriented things with youth for elders and other people in the community. And that's one of the ways I think you can tie, if you have a juvenile court, if you have younger offenders, community service tied to something like that would be really good, because they're learning traditional skills and knowledge. They're spending time with positive role models, and they're also in service to their community. And for lots of us, being able to have some sort of purpose or something to focus our energy on in a positive way, just like Vivian said, you know, good things beget good things. It's very helpful. So don't be afraid to write things down. Really spend time on thinking about what's really important to your community, really engaging the youth. we have tried for many years to try to get our older tribal membership interested and involved in working with these. But honestly, we have so many families that are involved in fishing and hunting and just working, you know, that it's difficult. So having your youth also, you know, as part of the curriculum, or even as part of like a club, something informational, so that they can understand what this is going to be good. We're always looking for ways to incorporate our youth in programs that we're developing, we're doing, because we want to make sure that our youth understand just how important it is our community works well together, and that they have a purpose in figuring out what the community can look like. As far as like the other stuff that Kevin said related to the codes and drafting, there's lots of people that help. There's tons of people around that can help. And yes, there are plenty of examples, but being able to take things step by step is really important. I'll probably share with Denise and you guys, if she wants to, some of the tools that I have, because we have a small staff. That's another thing. With a lot of our courts and a lot of our villages, we don't have large groups of employees that we can work with. One of the other things that's really important, one of the ways that we're coming around that in my region, in my little sub-region, is by pulling our traditional councils or tribal councils together so that we can work together on projects in like a consortium. The Native Village of Hooper Bay has an ICWA person, but they don't have a lot of people involved in their tribal court. So one of the ways that you can do this within your own area is by creating a little agreement between you and your neighboring villages, because I know lots of our areas, we have villages that kind of cluster close together, and we can pull our resources together, use people within those villages, because everybody is an expert. That's another thing I think that's really important that we understand. There's somebody that might know a lot about ICWA, and that person can be a resource for those other villages. Somebody might know a lot about a wellness court, and all those folks can learn from, we can learn from each other. But I don't want to take too much more time on, those are just the thoughts and the little notes that I pulled aside on Kevin's presentation.
Thanks, Estelle. I always think that Estelle likes to be humble when she speaks too. She really does have a lot of knowledge about tribal courts and our tribal communities. Darlene, are you still on the phone? You may have to press *6 to unmute yourself.
I hear you, Denise. Am I on?
You are on. I can hear you. I'm going to pass the mic to you to talk about your boots on the ground experience and getting tribal and community support.
All right. Thank you, Denise. Darlene Daniel from Magangakanak. I was the chief clerk of court for many years. Now I'm the administrator at the court. And I've gone through the presentation, what Kevin did, and we at our court, we looked at our samples from AVCP, from other villages to develop our codes and ordinances, and whichever doesn't fit in your community, you just need to take it off. You have to focus on your own community when you're doing your codes, and then present them to the council. and they'll present it to the village meeting where everyone has to approve them or change them or revise them. Here in Kang, we get them read in the village meeting at least 3 times before they get adopted. And once they get adopted, there are official codes or ordinances. And from what I have been noticing, when our members are not informed of decisions, like right now, I know there was a lot of people that are complaining about their tribal councils when they're not being informed of how the CARES Act funds are being distributed. So when they're not included on the decision making, that's when people are making a lot of noise and everybody's not happy. So I like that part where Kevin said, keep the members informed and reach out to them, get their help, work together. And what I like to point out is at our communities, we don't need to try to copy like the big city ordinances or how how their courts are run. We as our own community can have our own court, our tribal court, and run it in our own language, in Yupik or whatever language you're at, and still follow the due process. I'm sure we're going to learn more about that in future weeks as we're training. And what helped us reach out to the community was doing surveys, make sure everybody had a chance to answer some questions on how we should run our court. Those surveys help us to decide, even on fine amounts. Those surveys were done so people wouldn't be paying like outrageous fine amounts on the first offense. Like they'd start out small and then go up higher from there on as they are fined more. So, and I wanted to point out that getting our youth involved. What I liked in Kang was that when we have youth and elder conferences, we'd have different subjects per conference and have separate men groups and separate women's groups and a separate children's group. That way you'll get to tell each group and get different input from them. And what Kevin said, have door prizes, have potluck, eat together. And food always is good when people are invited. They'll get excited for food. And potluck is a good way of gathering and getting together. And especially during our election days, we did offer more door prizes at the village meeting from different organizations that are being voted on. Like the light plant would get board members elected, and they'd offer discount at their light bill. Couple of prizes towards that, and then the village would give out even laundry, free loads or free dryers, and cash prizes. That was what I mainly wrote down going through Kevin's presentation. if that's, if any of you have any questions, you could ask me. Oyana.
Thank you, Darlene. So Darlene also is very humble. Kong has been in, Kong's tribal courts has been running for a very long time. And for much of that time, Darlene was working on a volunteer basis. They also have started a domestic violence shelter in their community, and they run their court all in Yuhdun. So it's really great to see. I also have a YouTube video that our department is going to send a link out to each participant to this webinar, just so you're aware to keep an eye out for that. And it's a YouTube video in regard to Kong's tribal court. Thank you again, Darlene. Right now, I'd like to open the floor to any of the participants for questions or comments to any of our presenters. So remember to please press *6 or unmute yourself on the computer app if you have any questions or comments.
This is Daisy May.
Hi, Daisy May, go ahead.
I am very appreciative of the presentation being presented at our level. And I would like to setting the example and the roadway. The impression I gathered from all of this is that where there's a will, there is a way. And with that, with participation of community involvement.
Thank you, Daisy May. I really appreciate you speaking up and telling us your takeaways from today's webinar. Are there any other questions or comments? So hearing none, I would just like to thank everybody for taking time from your day to join us in today's session. Next week on Tuesday at 2 o'clock, we are going to go into session 2, where we will talk about BAA funding, tribal court assessments, and tribal court budgeting. If anybody has anything that they need to reach out to us for at the Tribal Justice Department, you can call us 907-543-8550 or email us at tribal-justice@evcp.org. And with that, we are done with today's session. Thank you.